Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to assemble a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character trait at a time. And it all starts with one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. This is episode 23. The individual character traits. Well, sort of. Last time we left off working with the dimensions of a character trait, and we said that the dimensions weren't quite so simple as to say vice to virtue as though that were a continuous path. Instead, we looked rather deeply at the concept of different voices and of struggle in the mind. When the voices are all relatively balanced, you have a situation where the character trait is well in mind and you can make a decision based on the character trait. As the voice of victory is ignored again and again and again and again, and the voice for chaos is chosen over and over, eventually that voice for victory fades away, and all you're left with is the voice of chaos and a nagging, useless struggle that has no chance of getting in. And so we said when we were finished with that analysis that in point of fact, the continuum for measuring a character trait was the volume of the voices. As the voice of chaos goes down, the voice of victory goes up, which represents stability. As the voice of stability goes down, the voice of chaos or loss goes up. So the dimensions of the character trait we discovered could actually be measured along a continuum of voices. And I suspect that a questionnaire over the continuum of voices would be a whole lot easier to evaluate than some kind of a questionnaire where we're saying, oh, how good are you? What kind of an answer are you going to get to that? So today we're going to go in the other direction of the dimension. If we're saying that the triangle represents a character trait which is composed of three voices, a voice of victory, a voice of loss, and a voice of struggle, now we know what constitutes one character trait. You might want to know how many character traits there are. Well, there are 28 of them. We'll see why they break down into 28 over time. But the convenience factor to be able to access them is that they break down into 4 character trait groups, represented by the different colors of triangles or the different struggles. Each triangle represents a triad: victory, loss, struggle. So those triads are different in 28 different compositions of those triads that represent the whole field of character traits. Well, 28 character traits is an awful lot to try to wrap your arms around, to try to learn. I teach them actually week by week by week across a 35 lesson course, 2/3 of a year. I spend a week, a solid week, a whole lesson with presentations, scenarios, all focused on one character trait at a time so that we can really come to understand them. So there's no way that in the course of a 10-minute podcast, I'm not even going to be able to name them all for you. But we're going to take a brief look at the character trait groups just to get a feel of it this evening. And then we're going to start looking into the groups themselves starting tomorrow. But for the first, I wanted to give you that other dimension. So you see, now we have 2 dimensions. We have the measurement dimension, which respects the voices, because each of these character traits, each individual character trait represented by one of these triangles, can go through that whole circle of voices. And we have to be aware of the incredible complexity that we are now dealing with. So if we have 3 voices with 28 character traits, we're getting close to 100 different emotions that we're trying to corral and understand. There's no way we're going to manage that without some reasonable grouping, or else, unless we're willing to spend 2/3 of a year taking them on one at a time. So let's just get a feel for the groups tonight. Our first group of character traits is the balance group. We're not going to go into the criteria for what goes into a balance group, or even to be more specific, the theory that outlines the balance group, because this is a taxonomy, and the nature of a taxonomy is that there is an underlying theory to provide order and direction. So the first group is a group of 7 balance traits. The second group is a group of 5 resilience traits. The third group is a group of 3 insight traits. And the last group is a group of 13 empathy traits. Because that group is extremely large, we will definitely be wanting to look at the subgroups. But it's rather interesting, and since it's the last group, we can linger on it just a little bit. It's rather interesting to note that survival of the human being as we were growing from our most primitive conditions was enormously dependent on the ability to exist in society. A lone human had almost no chance of making it. So our societal connections were so important for humans as we developed as a species. And that, in large measure, probably explains why we have so many different empathy traits, because all of the traits in the empathy group relate to our association with other human beings. So that, in fact, is where we're going to start tomorrow as we look into the subgroups of the empathy group. So that's all for tonight. Talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.